Hey, WEOL and Chronicle Telegram listeners and readers. I'm Rocco Nushi, and to my right over here, a very familiar face for those in the Chronicle Telegram and WEOL coverage area. It's Tim Gebhardt, who's getting ready to start, year number 45 of consecutive coverage here for high school sports in Lorain County. So, we were talking off air, so to speak, some of the background, Gebby, but let's start with that. Year 45, just hearing that. What are the feelings that kind of evoked? Did you think it would ever get to year 45?
I had no idea that it would go that far. And as I was telling you, I originally started at the Chronicle when I was in high school. So I'd come up on Friday and Saturday nights and answer the phone, and callers would call in with their games that weren't covered, and we would write a short. There was another gentleman that worked with me, and we would write a short story about the football game, and it would go downstairs to be printed in the next day's paper. Somebody like from Vermillion would call in, or Bridgeville, or wherever the games were played that weren't being covered that night by a writer. And then we'd write a short story. And I did that for a couple of years while I was in high school. And then I left. Jerry Rombach remembered me. And back in 1980, I was looking for something extra to do. I worked at Illyria Savings and Trust at the time. And I called him up, and he had an ad in the paper about wanting some sports writers. So I called him, and he said, sure. He said that would be perfect, because he knew of me. So I was hired sort of on the spot, and the rest is, like they say, is history, I guess.
Well, let's go back to the very first event you covered. You just got done, again, off there kind of telling me this story. 1966, you're quite literally hitchhiking to Midview to cover some high school football. Tell me about the very first event that you covered.
Well, that was Jerry was in a pinch for writers one night, and Midview was playing New London. That was at that time they were both in the Lakeland Conference, and Jerry asked me if I could cover that game, and I didn't want to say no, because I thought he'll never ask me to cover anything else. I lived in a family with 7 kids, and we only had one car. And when I was talking to my mom about it, she said, well, we've got this and this and this going on. You can't have the car that night. So you're going to have to tell them you can't do it. Well, I didn't want to do that. So I decided I was going to hitchhike to Midview. Back in 1966, that was, I wouldn't say common, but it was a means of transportation, that if you wanted to go somewhere, you would hitchhike, and inevitably somebody would pick you up. And so there was a guy, I think it was in a pickup truck, as I recall, and he was heading to Grafton. I was walking down East Avenue toward Grafton Road, and the gentleman picked me up, said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going out to the football game at Midview. And he said, well, I'm heading to Grafton. He said, and he dropped me right by the stadium, which was perfect. So I walked into the stadium there and covered the game. At that time, the Chronicle was an afternoon paper, so you had literally the entire day, the next day, to write the story for the afternoon paper. Had to be in by noon, I think, or whatever. But it was enough time. There was no deadline at 10 o'clock or midnight or whatever that night. So I had plenty of time to write the story. And so, when I left the game, I was done. I was heading out back toward the Capel Road and going to head down Grafton Road again. And Neil Horwood, who was a teacher in the Midview district, he lived in Illyria. And Neil Horwood stops his car and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to hitchhike back to Illyria." And he says, "No, you're not." So he was kind enough to give me a ride all the way home. So I kind of lucked out on that adventure, but it kind of made the first coverage, or the first game I ever covered, kind of memorable in a sense.
Well,
it's kind of cool.
You said
Midview won, by the way.
There you go. Hey, there you go. You used the word adventure there, and when Jared had brought you in a couple of moments ago, we were talking about adventures of being locked in inside of a stadium after hours or whatever. I mean, I'm sure you could go on for hours or days about the different adventures, the different road trips that you had been on. How much of high school sports coverage is just that, just sort of the random nonsense that can happen from, going to, these big coveted stadiums to some of the smaller venues?
Well, it's you're right. Now, I started to make a list of all the places that I had covered games, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, like in Lorain County, there are schools that are no longer even open anymore. South Amherst, for example,
Sure.
or Lorraine Catholic. Those are two that I've covered. I covered plenty of games in those two places. North Ridgeville has changed stadiums. Lurie High has changed stadiums. There have been several of those. Oberlin no longer has a high school stadium. So there are several places that I've been to and covered games that are no longer even there anymore. So it's been kind of fun to look back on that and think about those times.
I want to get back to the coverage in a second, but just from like a community and county standpoint, so many different communities. You mentioned North Ridgeville. I mean, that's unrecognizable, I'm sure, now compared to what you had seen in the early days of covering. Same with Avon, kind of their explosion, right? How crazy has that been to just see the different growth of these different communities? Again, Avon going from kind of that small area to, I mean, look at what Coach Elder has going on with those guys now.
The big thing with Avon, that's a good example, is that when I first started covering Avon, it was a small farming community. It was one of the smaller schools in the county, actually. They played in the old Inland Conference, and they played Keystone and Clearview and schools like that, schools the same size, South Amherst, Firelands, that kind of competition. And you never in your wildest dreams would imagine what Avon has become today, the powerhouse that they've become. Now, they had good teams, don't get me wrong. Avon every once in a while would have a very good football or basketball team come through the ranks. I remember the 60s, they had Mark Wager and DeChant and a couple of Bill Chapman. Those players played for Avon back in the 60s. They had some great basketball teams. Football also, they had some teams that would go undefeated, and then the next year they might go 1-9 or whatever. It'd be completely different. But Avon was just as boom from a growth standpoint in the last 20 years or whatever it's been.
I'm sure in 1966 or, in the 80s when you came back on as a stringer, it was probably very much notepad and pencil or pen. Right now, you see reporters, they got cameras, laptops, this, that, or the other. How much has that aspect of high school sports coverage changed just from some of the equipment and way you go about covering high school sports?
To be honest, I'm old school.
Nothing wrong with that.
I think you've seen, I still keep my stats on pencil and paper and
it's good man.
And a little bit of pad. I have a regular pad that I've kept my stats. I was lucky because when I started at the Chronicle in the when I was at the 80s, there were some good, solid reporters. Roger Nagin kind of took me under his wing at the time. Gene Legeza, who at the time worked at the Lorraine Journal, but I knew him from before when I worked at the Chronicle. Those guys were just enormous help to me. Of course, Jerry Rombach himself was a big help also. But they kind of showed me how to keep the stats and keep the box scores and so forth, so it'd be easy to write up. So I have a great deal of thanks to those guys that they kind of showed me the ropes that I didn't have to kind of do it by myself. But those guys also taught me, like for example, Gene Legeza for sure taught me that these are high school kids that are playing, so you don't treat them like professionals. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to drop passes. They're going to drop fumbles. They're going to miss free throws in basketball, that kind of thing. And so to be kind of take the edge off it a little bit and not be as critical to them. And that kind of taught me to be as fair as I could about my writing. The other thing that Gene taught me was to kind of associate myself with the coaches. You get yourself in good with the coaches, and they would treat you really, really good. And I've had such a great experience with all the coaches out there that many of them were players back when I first started. It's kind of funny. Yeah. It's like the second, third generational for me as they go along. So it's kind of weird in that aspect.
How special are some of those relationships that you build? I mean, like you said, you're covering kids, and then you're watching those same kids move on. They go off to college, they do whatever, and then they come back and they coach or they get involved with the school somehow, some way. How cool are just those relationships and seeing some of that?
Well, like one example is Brett Larrick at Illyria. I covered him quite a bit when he was playing, and then now it's been 15, 16 years that he's been the head coach, and I've covered pretty much all of his games as a head coach, and we've got a great relationship. We're good friends, and he knows. I think he knows that hey, if they lose a tough game, there's sometimes I'll have to write some articles in there about them losing instead of a game maybe they should have won or whatever. He understands that. Obviously, I'm not very critical of, and I never really took that road anyway to be critical of a coach. They're coaching, like I said earlier, high school kids. They're going to make mistakes, and there's going to be things that go that the kids don't listen to the coach necessarily. So I try to be as easy on them as I can. I'm not one that's going to break down their defense and make it sound like they lost the game because of some coaching errors or whatever. Some of the other ones, Kurt Russell out there at Oberlin. I remember when he was a player for Bob Walsh of all people.
Yeah.
And then Kurt Habermel, the same thing. He played for Coach Walsh at Vermillion, and then he's now been at Vermillion for a number of years. And those relationships become very strong. Back in when I first started, you mentioned I knew you had a show here about Bob Walsh.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to cover Bob Walsh when he was at Clearview, and then when he went to Oberlin, and then obviously when he came over to Elyria Catholic and Elyria High, and he was at Elyria for 3 years, and I covered just about all of his games, and he coached. And Coach Walsh can be tough, as I'm sure everybody.
So I was told, yeah.
But the thing with Coach Walsh is that he knew I had a job to do, and a lot of times he would say right off the bat, he said, "I have nothing to say. I have no comments about this game," and I would just kind of wait around, and he would soften up, and eventually he would talk and give me some good comments, and we became really good friends over the years too. Bob was a great coach. Obviously, his teams. The one thing I remembered about his teams is that day one to day, the end of the season, they are always improving. He always had them improving. Another coach that I'd like to mention that is also deceased now is Bob Junta of Elyria Catholic. Bob was just a special individual. Never got a technical foul called on him in all of his years. It's just amazing because you think that even an assistant or something jumping off the bench or whatever, there's a chance that an overzealous official might tee him up, and Bob would get the tee instead of the assistant coach, but it never happened to him. Another coach that never got a technical foul was Butch Soey at Keystone, and then later he coached at Elyria and later Medina even. So those two coaches managed to keep themselves under control for most of the games. Another coach I'd like to mention is Jim Lawhead. He's kind of like the dean now of area coaches at Lorain Catholic. He was just a super coach. Coached first at Lorain St. Mary, a couple years at Brookside, and then he went back to Lorain Catholic to finish his career. What an outstanding coach he was too. Also,
you mentioned at one point, maybe it was when Jared was still in here, your wife helping you with stats. At one point in time back in the day, and that just makes me think. Being in the media business, you work weird hours, right? That's no surprise. Just how crucial and important is that family support, right? Whether it's from a significant other, kids, everyone, right? Like you need some support to be able to stick with doing this.
Absolutely. Sharon was not necessarily a big sports fan when we first started dating, but over the years I converted her and her parents, for that matter, into sports fans. So there was one game that Lurie was playing at Barberton, which is quite a road trip. So I had to take my laptop to send the story back to the Chronicle that night. I made arrangements with Larry Bidlingmeyer, who was a graduate of Lurie High School. He was the athletic director at Barberton, so I got a hold of him before going out there. And Larry was most gracious about welcoming me and making me feel at home and everything. But the one thing that he forgot to do was to make sure his janitor left the gate open for me when the game was over. Game was over and the janitor's cleaning up and everything, and I could tell that he didn't want to wait around for me. I was finishing up my story. It takes probably about 45 minutes to an hour to do your box score and to do a story. So I was doing that, and I could tell that he wanted to get going. And I did tell him, I said, if you're all finished up, I said, I could let myself out. Just show me how to lock the door or whatever. And so the janitor said, I'll leave the gate downstairs open for you. And then you can let yourself out and then just lock it up when you leave. I said, fine. So my wife and I walked back down the bleachers after the thing was over and walked to the gate. Lo and behold, he had it padlocked. I'm thinking, what is this? So I didn't know what I was going to do. And the real high fences with, it wasn't barbed wire, but it was the top of an iron gate fence.
Sure,
I didn't want I certainly didn't want my wife, trying to make that jump. So we walked around, and the Barberton Stadium was fortunately built where there was a neighborhood close by. So we walked around to the other side of the stadium, picked up some pebbles off the track, and there was a house just close enough where I could throw some pebbles at the window. And it got this old lady, pretty old lady, nervous. I'm sure she looked out the window and saw that we were standing there. Well, she did the right thing, is what I wanted her to do. She called the police, and the police came, asked us what we were doing, and explained to them, and they let us. They obviously found a way to let us out. So that was kind of one of those experiences that you never forget. Being locked in Barberton. I called Larry Bidlingmeyer on Monday and asked him about that. He was so embarrassed that his janitor had done that. But it all worked out in the end. It was fine.
Yeah, you CT writers just notorious for getting the fuzz involved, huh?
Right.
My goodness,
right.
My goodness. Well, we can close with this, Gebby, and not to totally put you on the spot again. We talked about this outside, just sort of, do you have an end year and when you want to hang it up? Any kind of plan in that regard, or is it just kind of we'll take it year by year, and when you've had enough, you'll call it a day?
It's almost game by game at this point. The funny thing is, about 3 or 4 years ago, I remember telling Dwayne Sunigo, who was a softball coach. Yeah. I told Dwayne, I said, when I get to age 70, I'll probably decide that probably enough. Well, here it is. I'm 76 and I'm still doing it. But it's in the last 4 or 5 years, it's changed a little bit. I've not taken things for granted. I want to enjoy the game. I want to enjoy the people that I'm working with. I want to make sure that I compliment the people in the press box that have helped me, whether they actually helped or not. I'm just the fact that they were there, and, sure. And so I want to make sure that I thank all those people. It's been a great experience. The coaches, the players. We mentioned Brett Larrick earlier, and now it's like, I'll see a player that I covered 20 years ago. Now they've got their own kids, ready to play.
Isn't that something?
And it's like a second and third generation anymore that I've covered. And another person I wanted to mention was I had the opportunity to cover Mitch Gillum in his last 2 years. He coached at Illyria West, and then he coached at Illyria High in his last 2 years. Mitch was another one that was just a great coach. I remember people telling me that they were kind of afraid of him when they first covered a game with him. But once you got to know him and understood him, and he understood what you were doing, the relationship was great. He was just a super guy. One other thing I wanted to mention, going way back when I was in high school. Back when I was in high school, I worked at the Herald, which was the high school newspaper. Mm-hmm. That's how I got my start. It was something I've always wanted to do, was write sports. I was a fairly decent writer. The English teachers at Illyria High School were all very complimentary of me, and they all pushed me to do that, and all thought that I had a chance to be a good writer.
They were right.
So that was kind of nice that they kind of pushed me in that direction. But I had an assignment. Mrs. Ruckman, the Herald advisor, told me to make an appointment with Dale Rickenbaugh, the basketball coach, before the season started, to go in and talk to a preseason story about the Illyria basketball team. Dale Rickenbaugh, I don't know if people remember him. Dale Rickenbaugh was a tall, lanky guy. He sort of reminded everybody of Abe Lincoln. He he had kind of a gruff exterior, and people had a hard time getting to know him necessarily from the outside. But here again, I made the appointment with his secretary. He was a assistant principal at Elyria High School. And the day I had the meeting, I sat out there and waited for him to finish what he was doing. He called me in, and believe me, he couldn't have been nicer. He was just as nice as pie. Went over everything that I needed, talked about each player on the team, and gave me everything I needed. Was just a super person. And from then on, I knew that, coaches were just like everybody else, were human beings, and you could get along with them. And like I said, it made me understand to develop a good relationship, not only with coaches, but with athletic directors, and make sure that they knew I was coming out for their game. Like, I've already contacted the athletic directors for this week's game. I'll be covering Brookside and University School on Thursday, and Friday, North Ridgeville's playing North Olmsted. I'll be covering that game. So they're already aware that I'm on my way out there.
We can't all just wait till Friday, can't we?
Right.
Some of us got to get the action in on Thursday.
Right.
Unreal. Well, you're 45, getting ready to start. That is a heck of an accomplishment, and you're just going to keep going till you don't feel like it no more, I suppose. So,
I think my wife asked me the other day, "Do you think you can make it to 50?" Well, I don't know that I will. It's just really, like I said, it's almost become a game by game and year by year situation. And I've had nothing terrible, but I've had a few health issues here and there that have kind of slowed me down. But it's still, as long as it's fun to do, and as long as I enjoy doing it, as long as I don't embarrass myself, tripping up the bleachers or reporting the wrong score or the wrong winning team or whatever, I'll keep doing it. It's been fun.
We'll save the idiocy for us young guys. We can take it. You've certainly earned your respect. So, Gabby, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. It's always great seeing you out at these game sites. I'll actually see you on Thursday over there at Brookside as they get set to take on University. So, excellent talking with you, my friend.
Thank you very much for
that.
Great job. Thank you.
Absolutely. This is Tim Gebhardt of the Chronicle Telegram, starting year 45.